Friend of mine recently got hired at a company that used Google Translate to do the localization for their app. And he's been sharing some pretty bad examples with me recently. He started learning Japanese around the same time I did. Um, and it occurred to me that it might be fun to run the localization strings for my own app that I've been working on recently through a machine translation service and see what it comes up with. So here I am. I have three instances of this app open. This is an app I've been working on called Moyase, um, which is basically a goal tracking app with burn down capabilities to help me stay on track of my goals. I've been using it to track my Japanese learning progress. Here's my, for example, my novels for the year. I'm supposed to read 12, so my baseline pace is one per 30 days. I'm a little bit ahead of schedule here. So my current pace is one per 28 days, but for example, I'm quite far behind on playing 5 Japanese games this year, and so I would have to complete one per 28 days in order to get back on track, basically. That's the gist of it. This isn't really a video about the app, although if you're interested, you can download it for free from the link in the description. Um, but since I just recently finished up adding support for localization to it and wrote a Japanese translation of my own, I thought it'd be fun to compare and contrast. So this window here will be the English. Obviously, I'm a native English speaker, so I'm not expecting there to be anything weird here. This window will be for my personal translation that I did. I'm not amazing at Japanese, but I do think it's a pretty good translation. I've cross-referenced it with some other apps, checked with some native speakers. It should be good. Should be good. And then this one over here will be for the Deepl translation, which I'm using instead of Google Translate because it has a reputation of being quite good. I don't think that's really well deserved. I think it's better than Google Translate in many cases, but also pretty bad in other cases. So um, let's get right into it then. So I'll sort of be mimicking the same actions on all three pages, but let's just go ahead and start by switching the language here to the built-in Japanese locale that I made. And then over here, we will actually, oops, wrong menu. We'll actually import a locale file that I made just for this. So I'm gonna hit OK, and then we'll go back to settings, and we're going to select the Nihongo Deepl translation. We're going to save that. So right off the bat, the immediate difference, of course, is my goals. This is not really something that translates super well literally to Japanese. In my translation, I went for mokyou listo, which is sort of a generic, is what you would expect to see on any to-do list. Deepl came up with literally, watashi no mokyou, my goals. So, it is literally a translation of what I put in. However, idiomatically, it's not something you would expect to see in an app like this. It's worth pointing out that these titles, like novels, are not going to be translated. Those are user-entered strings. They should be the same across all instances. Another example here. So due by December 31st, for example. What I went with was this kind of terse, very like data-oriented display here. 12月30日までに, so complete it by this date. What Deepl went with, and this is a very common trap sort of, is to translate everything that it gets as a sentence. This is not a sentence. It's like a fragment or a piece of information. What Deepl came up with is literally saying the term for this goal or rather the expiration date for this goal, the due by date is uh, December 31st. This is an okay sentence, but I wouldn't expect to see a sentence here, is sort of the paradoxical thing. Um, Moving along here to the categories. So on the English version, complete. So, goals where you have reached zero, where you have gone down, completed all the work that was due. We'll go into this category here. For my Japanese version, I went with passé, which means, what's that? Passé, yeah. Which means achieved, basically accomplished. So accomplished, I feel, would be a kind of a weird word here to use in the English version, but it makes more sense idiomatically in Japanese, so that's why I went with here. Deepl obviously doesn't have the context or really understand the nuance to come up with that. So kanryo is the word they came up with. It's more literal, but it's also a little bit less natural. It doesn't really have the kind of passé is kind of like congratulatory nuance almost. Hey, you completed the goal, good job. Kanryo is more like it's a little bit colder maybe. Just another one of those little nuance things. The other category that we have here is archived. So this is, you don't really want, in my case, I had this book. I was like, actually, I'm not gonna read that book right away. I'll read this one instead. So I archived it. In Japanese, the more idiomatic term is sort of like put it in storage. So, so Deepl came up with literally archive, just the English word archive in katakana. A little, it's a little bit clumsy, not very natural, I suppose. And the last thing on this home screen we're gonna see is the options pop over. So here's an interesting little gripe, I suppose. This archive or hyoji, is it hyoji or hyoji? Hyoji, yeah. This is not grammatically correct at all. It's basically saying like the displaying of the archive. What I want to say is show the goals that are archived. So over here, I literally have show the archive, show the completion. Here we have a verb pattern in the top one, which is fine. Again, they're using kanryo instead of tasse, but that's totally fine. Since at least it matches with the category. But for some reason they didn't translate these two very similar strings as even being in the same format, let alone this one is for some reason ungrammatical. So, I'm not sure what's going on there. Let's see. For the next bit, let's look at creating a new goal. This is kind of an interesting, kind of a demo of the app as well. Whoops. Okay, so this apparently just straight up broke. I did actually go through the translated data and clean it up a little bit. So these braces are supposed to sort of interpolate values into spots, and it didn't always work. I think there might be something wrong with the Deepl API. In any case, we won't hold this one against them. That's honestly something that should have human oversight no matter what. You can't expect to just throw in your format strings and they would work right away. So here's an interesting thing, and this is another thing that should have human oversight, but the placeholder for this, basically what this is supposed to do is like, let's say you want to read a certain number of books. In order for it to display nicely, you can type in book/books. In Japanese, which doesn't have, it would be book/books. In Japanese, which doesn't have a plural system really, then you could just do the counter for books. You could just say satsu like this. And then it would say, 10 books. It would add this after the number. Deepl, and again, this is something that, it probably should have been, I should have, or in an ideal circumstance, it would have some human oversight. But it came up with this unito, and then what is this? Tani? Like, I don't even know why they would have picked that. Um, but these two words, they should at very least have a relationship to each other, and they don't. So I'm not really sure what was going on there. Um, I went personally, again, this is sort of a idiomatic consideration, but in Japanese burn down methodology, you instead of units of work, you call them tasks, tasku. So, I went with tasku ryo as in quantity of tasks, and then just, placeholder for task here. Sakuhin su, this is literally, or sakuhin, what was it? Sakuhin kazu. I think it was sakuhin su. This would literally be like works, like artworks, the number of artworks. So it gets it wrong. It doesn't understand the context. And then up here, atarashi mokyo. It's fine. I personally went with basically define goal or create, set forth a goal. Atarashi is like one of those words that is very overused in English to Japanese translations. Um, to mean new, it's a little bit lose a little bit of nuance, but it's not awful. Uh, Again, it's just something that's a little bit unnatural. So now that we have gone through the creating a goal window, let's look at an actual goal that we've set out here. So this was another one that I had to do a little bit of cleanup on, but it's ultimately the content is more egregious than the formatting errors. So, over here in English, 8 out of 12 books complete, baseline pace, one book per 30 days, adjusted pace, one book per 28 days. So, what I went with in Japanese was instead of baseline pace, recommended pace. This is just sort of like almost a friendly way of saying, like, here's what we personally recommend. Um, it has a bit of um, it's a little bit polite because it's a little bit indirect. But in any case, every 30 days, one book. And then here's the pace at the current time. So, what Deepl has come up with is this. So baseline, so basically pace of baseline, which doesn't really mean anything in Japanese. It's just, I think it just saw these two words and it's like, I don't know what to do with that. And then each tasku atari 30 nichi atari. This is not grammatical. I did at one point use the atari ni grammatical construct in my display string here, but if I were to have done that, I would not have put it at the end. I'm not sure what they were. I mean, it's not like it was thinking, right? It's a machine, but I'm not really sure what was supposed to happen here. And then this word, what is this? Chosei adjustment after. So like after the pace after adjustment, I can kind of see the logic. Like I might be able to puzzle my way through this if I had seen it, but it's a definitely a weird use of this word, chosei. Um, the one that I went with, basically the pace at this moment in time, that's more idiomatic, I suppose. The really kind of weird thing here is so again using burn down chart terminology, I've got the ideal remaining line, right? The Solsen is literally the ideal line that shows where your task should go. Deepl came up with nokori no diso, which is like the remaining ideals, as in I have a certain ideal for how I believe something should be, and these are the ones that are remaining. It doesn't translate at all here. It does not make any sense. And then nokori, like literally, it's just what remains. That's fine, I suppose. I personally went with like remaining quantity of work. Um, but if you're looking at literally it's just taking the word remaining and translating. That's fine. I can't fault it for that. Then we have, this is another, oops, another sort of example where it takes a sentence. I mean, in English, it sort of makes sense for this to be a sentence. In Japanese, it doesn't really, in my opinion, in a like a quick readout like this. But even so, it tries to rearrange. Well, actually, no, it didn't try to rearrange in this case. It just put the exact format that I have, the exact order where it has the number and then the counter and then the completed today. It tried to put that in the exact same order, which just comes up with an awkward sentence. The order that I put in my in my translation over here is definitely much more natural in terms of the word order. So let's see, we'll go back. What do we want to see next? Let's look at the storage menu. This is another place where it was sort of, oh, actually, I guess we can look at the side menu first. So in my translation, I went with the kanji for the word. The Deepl translation just went with the hiragana. There actually is a pretty fascinating inclusion here because I just literally gave it the word about, and somehow it realized that what I meant to say was about this app, which is in fact what I put in my personal translation, my human authored translation, apori ni tsuite, about the app. Deepl came up with moyase ni tsuite, which is a little weird that it didn't translate it here, or transliterate it at least. But I have to say I'm impressed that it was able to figure out from all the strings that I put in that this about should refer to about moyase. That is honestly pretty surprising. One of the big criticisms about Google Translate is that you can give it all this information and it will just forget. It won't realize from sentence to sentence what you're talking about. And it's pretty neat that Moyase, or that rather Deepl, was able to pick up on that. So we'll start with the about screen because it is a little bit bad. So basically my translation of this string was the author of this app is Jacob Albano. When Deepl saw Moyase as an app by, which is a different string than this part here, it knew that this was an incomplete sentence, but it didn't know what format it would be used in. So what it came up with, Moyase wa ijo no apuri desu. Moyase is an app by the below, basically. But the problem is this is not a complete sentence, and so it shouldn't have a des or a period at the end. And my name is not below, right? It's in the same sentence. So that's a little awkward. It also just erased the, I mean, I guess in the original there is no post string, so that's sort of forgivable. But also this is again just sort of a an idiomatic change. So I went with basically technology used, and then this one with technology credit. Again, it is a literal translation of what I put in originally, but it's also a little awkward. And then the same problem as above happened here, where localization data can be found here, but then there's nothing in this post string. Japanese does have a post string, but since it wasn't there in the original English, then Deepl does not come back with one. All right, let's see. We'll go on to the next menu. We'll just go to storage since it's a quick one. So this one I can kind of I can hardly fault it for some of the changes because the English version is more terse. It doesn't have all of the data that I felt was necessary to adequately get the idea across in Japanese. However, there are still some weird things here. Import, storage no clear. This is again not a grammatical sentence. It's like the, how would you even, this is not a verb sentence. Um, I use, you know, subete no data o kesu, which, you know, means delete all data. This here is a verb phrase. If this no was actually an ol particle, then that would make a little more sense. It would still, I think kuria is still not the best one here, but it's fine. The main thing is that for some reason this is just not grammatical, and the same exact problem is indicated here. Rokeru no impoto as opposed to rokeru o impoto. So again, it's just sort of choking on that for some reason. We'll go to the last window here, the settings window. And I guess there are a couple more strings that I haven't demonstrated. So for example, in the time picker here, it just straight up doesn't translate AM and PM. I'm not really sure why. It does keep okay as just the English letters okay, which makes sense. That's an idiomatic thing to do. That's what I did over here. One common mistake I want to say in English to Japanese translation is assuming that you must use Japanese everywhere. And that's definitely not the case. There are lots of games that I've played, for example, where the whole main menu is all in English, and it's just how the conventions are. So this is these are just a little bit awkward. Again, where was it? Where was it? I thought I just saw one of those inconsistencies. The basically just the phrasing, the beginning of the week phrasing here, a little bit awkward. The next day starts at phrasing here, just a little bit awkward. It's like most of these you could probably puzzle them out, but again, it's sort of, I feel like a big problem with Deepl is that it's very often good enough that you might not notice the strangeness with with an unpracticed eye, which again, like as I said at the beginning, makes a lot of people think that it's better. You know, I mean, it certainly might be better than Google Translate, but still does not make it good. There was one more thing I wanted to point out, and I can't remember where it was. Let's see. I have, oh, here, okay, here's something. So if I put in an invalid, again, we're going to ignore the bad formatting, but let's say I put in some letters in this field here, and this field is only supposed to have numbers, right? So Deepl comes up with this. So in English, my verification or validation number is very terse. It must be a number. If I put in the wrong format here, it must be singular, plural. Incidentally, this does not have any validation in Japanese because there's only one pattern for singular, plural, etc., etc. But Deepl comes up with this very stiff, like, I'm not even sure how to describe it, almost scolding phrasing, suji de aru koto, like make sure you are a number. A much more idiomatic example in this case would be please only type in half width numeric characters. It's in terms of like how you interact with your customer almost. being polite in these situations is pretty important. Let's see, there was one more, and I want to look at the translation file here because I can't remember where it was. Oh, okay. So we'll go to the settings window again. Here we go. So here, this sentence here is in polite form, which, like I was just saying in the validation messages part, there are times when you want to use polite form, but there are times when you don't want to use any form, really, because this is not a sentence, really. For example, when you press a button to close the elevator doors, that will often not be in a verb form per se. It won't say, I mean, in this example, I'm just using hyoji, not hyoji shimasu or hyoji suru. However, Deepl did pick polite form for this option here. But over here, it picked plain form, which is actually perhaps unique across the app. Everything else I think is, here we have polite form. Let's see. Storage, this didn't have any. This tried to be polite. There are lots of places where it's trying to use polite form except here for some reason. And I've seen this in a couple games. Tabletop Simulator, of course, I have a video on that from a couple months ago when they added Google Translate support. And that was a huge train wreck for a number of reasons, but it quite obviously had the this is polite, this is not problem often in strings that were right next to each other. It's just something that always sticks out. You can always tell when something is machine translated if one sentence is polite and one that is very similar to the original sentence is not for some reason. Let's see, was there anything else in the strings file that I wanted to look at? I think there were one example here. There's a lot of text in this app that is sort of not always easy to find. But since we're about to end the video, I'll go ahead and clear the storage here. So in English, I have confirm, which is a pretty standard header for an alert like this, really delete all storage. In Japanese, I went with chui, which means like basically caution or beware. This is a destructive action. This is again an idiomatic choice. 本当に全てのデータを消す. Do you really want to delete all data? Deepl came up with something similar, I guess. I do feel like storage is not as helpful here as opposed to data, but we won't split hairs too much. The main thing I wanted to draw attention to is this word here, kakunin, which is not a confirm type word in the sense of confirm what you're about, like confirm your action. Do you really want to do this? It's like an ascertaining type word. It's like, I believe something to be true. I will now confirm whether it's true. So again, this is just a case where using a machine translator without the full context and without a practiced eye to look over it is going to give you these kinds of results where you're like, I don't know, that looks good, kakunin, sure. And then, you just kind of end up with a bad translation. The app that my friend is working on that prompted all this uses, for example, instead of like open file, it says hiraita, which means like the door has been opened. It's definitely not the word you want to use. And of course, there are examples that I've shown in the Tabletop Simulator video as well, like using correct instead of the direction right, just because those happen to be synonyms in English. In any case, we'll go ahead and delete that. Since it's deleting all of our storage, it's setting the language back to English. And that will do it. So hopefully somebody found this interesting. If you're curious about the app, again, the link is going to be in the description. And I will see you guys on the next one. Take care.